Hi, everyone. This is Jill Schoelen, and you're listening to the RockStop with Chris Contra. And me.
Okay, welcome into the RockStop. Chris Contra here. Joining me on the program this evening is a very lovely and talented actress, sometimes referred to as a scream queen. We'll see how she feels about that. This is Jill Schoelen. How's it going, Jill?
It's going well. That just cracks me up every time I hear Scream Queen. I'm really not a Scream Queen. I think I'm the other title of in the horror genre, the final girl.
That was kind of my first question, too, because I've heard you described that way, and, you know, a different type of Scream Queen, they say. But, yeah, you're right. You're more of the final girl. I think you're being miscategorized a bit. It's
funny because just this past weekend I was in Pennsylvania for a film festival, and we were having this conversation about Scream Queens and final girls and how I never really died in any of my films. I was more the girl next door with a lot of intelligence in her back pocket and the smart one, and I kind of killed the bad guy.
Yeah. I think a lot of people think of Jamie Lee Curtis in the first Halloween. You know, she didn't die in that movie, yet she got that Scream Queen label, I think, from that role. I mean, she did a lot of horror movies where she wasn't getting killed off too much, but back then, anyway, everybody thought of her as a Scream Queen, you know?
I know. So I think the final girl, and they are different. It's a different type of character, that final girl character, than the Scream Queen. And I just think, overall, if you're a female lead, or not even a lead, but just one of many smaller leads in a horror movie, everyone gets lumped into the category of Scream Queen.
Yeah, I think we've seen that quite often. And your resume, I mean, you've done a lot of horror movies, I guess, is why. But I'll tell you this about your horror movies that I think sets you apart from some of the more run-of-the-mill ones. You did The Stepfather, which was probably one of your biggest movies. And then you did the sequel to When a Stranger Calls, which was outstanding and really a clever movie. So, I mean, you did a lot of horror movies, but I think yours were a little different than the run-of-the-mill slasher movies.
I really appreciate that. That's very lovely of you to point out, because I do take a lot of pride in that. It's interesting because as the years go on, I really see that I feel like I'm forgotten into a lot of people because I didn't do those kind of iconic, Friday the 13th and Nightmares and Hell this and
yeah.
Just where those movies that you go on, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4.
Yeah.
Mine were just different, a little bit more psychological thriller. They definitely obviously have that horrific part of horror.
Yeah.
In their suspense thriller qualities, but they weren't really, slash and bash and dice them up horror movies. I mean, there was a couple I did, I suppose, that had a little bit of that element in it, but not like a lot of other horror movies.
Right.
And The Stepfather was not really seen as a horror movie. It was a small psychological thriller. And, if you watch the movie, it has that element, but it just had an intelligence to it.
Oh,
it
absolutely.
had this, dark comedy to it.
Yeah.
In its horror, in its thriller part, that was quite intriguing and very entertaining.
Right.
It made you scared, but Terry O'Quinn made you laugh, you can't believe it. This can't be real. This guy's too much to be real.
Yeah. To talk about The Stepfather a little bit, this was a movie made in 1987, I believe it came out. Is that about right?
87? Yes, it came out in 87, I think early 87.
So this was filmed, I heard, somewhere in Vancouver, right?
We shot it in Vancouver. When I got to Vancouver, my mom brought me out to set me up and make sure I was all okay, because it was really my first, film where I was the lead and blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, my mother took me up there and was settling me in, and when I got up on location, we still had no mother and no stepfather.
So you were cast?
It was uncast.
Oh, wow. So you were cast like one of the first people on that movie, huh?
I was, and I remember asking Joe Rubin, the director, the brilliant director, like, what's the deal? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
And I was told that they thought that my role would be the difficult one to cast. They knew they would put out offers and they would get somebody to do it, and they had some offers out to some huge names, but it just wasn't happening. And then there we were on location, and everything was happening. The movie was going to happen, and they needed to cast it. And every actor kept falling out, so they brought in 3 actors for me to read with while I was already in Vancouver. And I do like, of course, they maybe didn't pay 1 ounce of attention to my opinion, but they did ask me my opinion, who I best worked with, or blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I said, well, there's no comparison. The one man, Terry, he
wow.
was, it.
Yeah.
And he was brilliant. I mean, like right there, spontaneously reading with him, a cold reading, never meeting before, nothing, just reading cold with him. It was just right there like it was in front of the camera.
Wow. So you read with a few actors. They were, I'm assuming they were kind of pressed, like they really wanted to get the Stepfather casted pretty quick here.
Well, they had to.
Right.
I mean, we were going to start shooting like in a day.
Oh, man.
Maybe not literally a day. I think I was there for maybe 2 weeks prior to the first day. So sometime in that week or two prior to shooting, they flew a few guys up and actors. I don't remember who the other actors were, but obviously Terry.
Yeah.
I would have remembered him if he didn't get the role, because he really stood out that much in the reading.
Oh, I can imagine. So you when you were reading with him, you saw this was the guy probably that should be the Stepfather.
Well, I don't know if he comes from the same place I come from in acting. I have no idea. We've never discussed it at the time. But it felt like he did. Yeah. And that's just where you just go with it. It's not pre-planned. You discover it.
Yeah.
You're just there and you don't know where you're going. It's kind of like jumping off a cliff, right? And you have you have everything you need. You're prepared for what might happen in the jump,
yeah.
Right? You're prepared in that way. You're dressed hopefully appropriately. You're thinking you've done your homework. You know what's below. It's like, but you don't really know. You can never plan out how it's actually going to go.
Yeah.
And it's that moment, and the next jump is its own moment. And every time it's spontaneously, and you don't really know where it's going to go. And usually if you do know where it's going to go, it shows on the screen.
Yeah.
There's like this perfect balance with magic that happens on the screen between being prepared and knowing, and within knowing, totally letting go to the unknown. There's like this magic that happens between the unknown and the known.
And it's more about like just feeling it within the moment, not overthinking things, and watching you and
not thinking about it at all. You have just like how you and I right now. We don't know what we're going to talk about in 5 seconds from now, in 10 seconds from now, certainly not in 10 minutes from now.
Right.
No idea. It's really that same way. You memorize the words to forget them. That's why you memorize. So you can forget them. So you can just live them. Where the words, just like when you say, count to 10 as fast as you can go, what do you think, again, and not even think about it. You can't even say it as fast as your brain can think it, because you know it so well, you don't need to think about it.
Yeah.
That's what memorizing lines. It's the same process.
Wow.
You memorize it so well that you can forget it. For me, I think you either memorize it like that, or you do the opposite and you read it cold, which is Marlon Brando did that technique.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just you're seeing the lines for the first time, and it's so cold that you don't know what's coming around the next corner. But you can't wait to get in that, to take that thrill ride and see, put me there, put me in that car. I want to see what's around that next corner. I want that thrill.
Wow, I gotta say, your take on acting, I think, brings out the most natural elements to acting that I don't think maybe a lot of actors and actresses may not use this kind of philosophy that you're really your thought process, and it's very interesting.
Well, I love it. When I was very young and making movies, I made films that directors had their own ideas and they imposed it on you. And because you're a young woman in the 80s, everything that I just spoke about would take a back seat. And then I fume, and then I'm frustrated. And as a woman back then, a young woman, felt like I couldn't speak up. And if I did, nobody cared. And part two, if I did, I probably would have been fired.
Yeah.
But there's a reason some performances are better than others.
Yeah.
And usually the better performances and the better movies are where the directors are doing less controlling. They're kind of on that same thing. They do their homework.
Yeah.
The best movies, the directors do all of their homework. They're so prepared. And yet in the moment, they abandon it and they let it find its own life. The character finds its own life off of the page.
I'm imagining that you have taught some acting in your day.
I have a lot. I do. I was teaching for a while.
I can tell.
Just because it came naturally. The truth of the matter is, my mentor, we had so many great actors in our class over the years. Let me think of some of them. Well, my dear, dear good friend who I'm doing my new show with, which hopefully we'll talk about later, Sugar and Scream, Suzanne Snyder.
Okay. From
Killer Clowns from Outer Space and Weird Science. And anyway, Suzanne was in class. Katie Seagal. Remember Katie Seagal?
From Married with Children?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Katie Seagal, Paul Ben Victor, Carla Guccini, Brad Pitt. I mean, we had so many people in class with us. There's so many I can't even think of them.
Wow. Yeah.
But my mentor, my wonderful acting teacher, Gene Bua, who had passed away now about 7 years ago, his wife took over his school when he died. And I was like a surrogate daughter to them. They always called me their spirit daughter. Tony was his wife. And she died 3 years ago. And before she died, she had the school and she had all the students. And she asked me if I would bridge it to, help keep it alive for these students until they found a new home or whatever with their acting. So I did that at her request, and I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it. It is good. It's great when you work with somebody and then things happen. I mean, I worked with a few actors. A lot of my friends, people have come to me and asked me to work with them because I just know how to kind of get performances out of people.
Well, that would make you good for directing and things. I mean, have you ever directed?
Yes. No, I was attached to a film, but that fell out. But I do look forward to doing that one day. I don't know if I ever will, because there's so much that goes into it. I think I will, but it's such a huge commitment. But I think I could do it because I do understand things from that point of view. And when I was acting in movies, I always liked to, attach myself like a sticky note to the DPs. And I always had a million questions and watched every aspect of that. And I was always able, like back when in the dailies and watching at the end of the day, I was always able to not think of, that's Jill up there. I never thought of it that way. I was always like in The Stepfather, that's Stephanie. I was capable of that, divorcing myself and just looking at the pieces
Wow.
How do you put the pieces together?
Yeah.
I love that. It's like a puzzle.
That's very cool. I don't know a lot of actors and actresses that maybe do that. I mean, I think they look and see themselves up on the screen, and they're critiquing their own work the whole time. And how was I here? How was I there? But you have a different.
I critique one thing and one thing only. Well, not in terms of the acting, only one thing. Does it resonate as truthful humanity? That's it.
That's it.
Does it whether it's, just an everyday conversation, or somebody just lost someone, or they're being chased by someone.
Yeah.
The actor has to be in the humanity of that moment. And is it real? Are they acting, or is it real?
And I'm sure
that's it. That's the criteria.
And as you critique your own work and you look at that, I'm sure you sometimes see and be like, oh, this could have been handled this way, and I should have done it this way. I mean, that's only natural, right?
Well, I think definitely. I mean, when I look back at certain things, like I did a movie called Cutting Class, starred Donovan Leitch and Brad Pitt, and it was not a good experience for me working on that film. I had no freedom, and that lack of freedom shows, because that's not how I approach acting. Yeah. I don't know how to act like that. If you're gonna dictate to me where to walk, how to say it, I don't, it shuts me down. I can't operate that way. Yeah. But so if I see any part of that film, which I happened to the other day when I was in Pennsylvania at this film festival, I was like, what I would give to have all of who I am now back then.
Wow.
Because I knew back then, but I didn't feel I had a voice to voice it.
Yeah.
Right? So instead, I handed over my power to someone else.
Yeah.
And I'm the one that looks. I'm the one that has a poor reflection, because it's me up there on the screen.
Right.
I wouldn't make that mistake today.
So I don't even know who directed that movie, but you were talking about directors earlier, and what really, in your opinion, makes a great director, and that's somebody that's not too hands-on.
I tell you, one of my favorite directors I ever worked with, and I'm really sad I never worked with him on film, but that's Sean Penn.
Mm.
Sean saw me in a movie called That Was Then, This Is Now, that a friend of his wrote, Emilio Estevez.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that part, he hired me for a script called The Kindness of Women that he wrote and directed here in L.A. because he was wanting, this is before he had his opportunity to direct. He was looking for that opportunity to direct and wanted to put something out there and do something to show that he could write and direct. So he did this play called The Kindness of Women. And I loved working with him because he had the language to talk to actors. And he had the same thing. It's like, where you're going, right? It's like, if I'm in Los Angeles and I'm like, I'm going to take a road trip. I'm going to go to New York.
Yeah.
You map out a plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
You map out your plan, but sometimes you take detours.
Right.
When you're in the car, you're like, wow, God, I didn't think, let's move that to tomorrow because this is so great. This is so great what's happening here.
Right.
He understood that. He wasn't afraid of that discovery of that moment that might totally shift everything around. You're still going to get to New York.
Yeah.
You're still going to ultimately end there.
Yeah, exactly. And do you think it's because Sean Penn, Sean Penn was an actor, so, I mean, do you think actors make better directors?
I do. Not always. There's no always to anything in life.
Right.
Never, ever, ever. Just like there's no nevers, right? Never say never. So there I go, already messing that one up. I do. I think often actors that have the bug to direct, often when it's not from a place of their ego, but from a place of true wonderment.
I want to jump back to the Stepfather. A few more questions on that movie. So you mentioned how they were casting it while you were there. That's pretty crazy stuff. I don't know how often that happens. But so then they got Terry O'Quinn in and Shelley Hack, and they brought in the cast. And then the chemistry between you and Terry was, I mean, it was so good. I mean, a couple scenes that really stand out. I mean, again, you play like this girl, Stephanie, the angsty teen. You were a little older than a teen at the time, but you captured it perfectly. You know, that angsty teen girl. For example, when the psychiatrist, when, you know, he killed the psychiatrist, then he told you about it. That scene in the garage where you're putting the tire on the bike or whatever you're doing with that. I thought true emotion in that scene. Really great stuff.
Well, I'm going to tell you a little trivia about that scene. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
It was raining buckets. I mean, we had so much rain during that shoot. It was jaw-dropping, the amount of rain. I've never seen rain like that, and so consistently for so many days and weeks. And in the garage, it was like a tin roof. It sounded like a tin roof. None of the dialogue was like, you couldn't hear.
Oh, wow.
The entire scene had to be redone.
Really?
On a soundstage 9 months later.
Oh, man.
Picture is as it was, but all of our dialogue was looped in, was all put in after, including the crying.
Wow.
And matching my mouth to the crying.
Was that tricky to do?
It's so hard. You have to go to another place because you have to be, there it is again, that knowing and the unknowing. You can't like, you know, cry and have it be not match your mouth.
Yeah,
you have to make it match your mouth. Try that on. It's hard enough to get deep into those emotions, but to make those kind of emotions match the rhythm of the way you said it before, you could never say it the way you did, especially if you're crying. I mean, everyone says when they're crying, they feel out of control. It's like everything lets go, right? So It was hard. It was tricky. I don't know where it came from, but it got there.
Yeah, it did get there. So, wow, I didn't know that. It did blend back into the film quite nicely, though. As I said, I would have never known that if you didn't just share that with me. So it blended in very nicely. And again, even though you had to overdub it, that just the chemistry between you and Terry. Another one was in the car on the way back from the psychiatrist's office. I think it was really authentic, the interaction between you guys before all the horror stuff kicks in. Just those little scenes, I think, is what made that movie so great.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying that. It felt real at the time. That's the great thing about working with great people, is that it allows that feeling to feel so real. It's like you feel great at the end of the workday because you know it just went well.
Yeah, and Joseph Rubin gave you guys some. He was a good director. He wasn't too hands-on. He was gave you a lot of freedom.
Well, he was the perfect amount of hands-on. He said what needed to be said and left what needed to be not said unsaid.
Right.
Again, that perfect balance. It's instinctual.
Yeah. So how long was that shoot for the whole movie?
6 weeks, maybe.
6 weeks.
7 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. Probably somewhere. Most of the movies I did were between 6 and 8 weeks.
Okay, I gotcha. And I saw a picture you shared on Twitter, like a behind-the-scenes photo of you, Terry, and Shelley. Like, it must have been after some of the violent sequences because they're covered in blood, and you guys are smiling into the camera. It's an awesome, just an awesome behind-the-scenes photo.
That's hilarious. That is one of my all-time favorite pictures because we just took a picture. It was like, hey, you guys, and we all looked at the camera and smiled. And there we are with like blood everywhere. And
yeah, it's a cool one for Stepfather fans to check out for sure. So yeah, that, and then, you know, the Stepfather, another scene, of course, the nude scene in the shower. I mean, was that, were you comfortable doing that?
I wasn't. I really wasn't, and I didn't really, that was the only movie I've ever been naked in. And by today, they can't do that. You know, they're not allowed to if the character is under 18 years old. I mean, don't quote me, but I think I'm quotable saying this. I don't think you're allowed to portray I don't think you can show somebody naked if they're portraying somebody under 18 years old. Having said that, I remember talking to the director about it, Reuben, and he talked me into why there was importance to it, and I get that. It wasn't about the sex. I mean, it may have been for, I don't know, people out there like that kind of thing, but it was to show her vulnerability.
Right.
It just makes it so much scarier that she's there with nothingness, just as innocent as can be, taking a shower, and has no idea that, you know, this man has just, like, practically killed her mother, beaten her, and he's sitting there with a knife, and he's about to come after her.
Right.
I mean, and I agree with you, Reuben, about that aspect. I'm still not so sure. I mean, I'm more on board with, you know, not portraying a girl that's 15 years old naked on film. I think that's a wise choice that we're making.
Right. So people know, you were older than 18 at the time.
I was. Let me be very, very clear about that. I was much older. I think I was 23.
Okay. Right. So, but you were portraying a 16-year-old. That's what all this discussion is about in that shower sequence there. So, I could see.
Yeah. No, I was not that age.
Right.
So,
but I
you know, I mean, it's a very sensitive thing. It's very sensitive. You know, there's, very sensitive topic.
Right, I gotcha. But what you said about Joe Rubin and his take on that, I think that's a very good take. You know, if you see the movie, at that point in the movie, I mean, it's reached the climax, and Stephanie, your character, is not even aware of the horror that's about to take place. And Terry O'Quinn's character is gone at that point. He is completely psychotic. And right, putting her in that position, that's very vulnerable. I think a lot of people watch that scene. It's about, you know, just being vulnerable in that situation.
Yes. Having said that, I think, you know, at that time that we were still thinking about stuff differently. Now we're very aware, very sensitive to what young women what all women, but in this case we're talking about young women, go through. And that choice couldn't be made today. And if it could, I don't think it would be. They would find another way to do it. There's ways to show the vulnerability of that character without, you know, letting a 15-year-old girl stand there naked.
I'm pretty sure you're right about that. I think it would be completely different these days. But in that movie, it was handled like that. Now, after after the shower scene, you proceed to have this very frightening chase sequence. Terry's after you, and a pretty physically demanding sequence, it looked like.
It was, and they did have a stunt person for me, but I did ask to do all my stunts. I think there was one that they insisted that she does, or maybe sometimes they let me and the stunt double do it. I don't really remember, other than that I did pretty much everything. I would venture to say that the stunt double may not even be in the final film.
Wow.
I'd have to watch it from that point of view to examine it.
Yeah.
And I never have. But I pretty much did everything. It was pretty scary. I mean, that last sequence, I think, took at least a week to shoot.
Wow.
So it was like all day, every day,
and it was
chased. I remember like nightmares at night when I would go to sleep.
Oh, wow.
Dreaming about it, not being able to get away from it, you know.
Right. It's very intense for people who haven't seen the movie. It's that final showdown between your character and Terry O'Quinn's character, and it's pretty frightening stuff. And so you did most of your stunts on that. Now, you said you didn't watch that back when it came out. Did you go to the premiere or anything?
I'm sure I did. I think they did have some stuff. I don't remember that part very strongly, to be honest with you. I don't know if they had like a traditional premiere. I think the movie was probably too small, and the movie was very unusual unusual when it came out because it came out with one platform of press on it, and then they pulled the movie, and that was going to be the end of it. But the problem was, which was a wonderful problem, which is the reviews were so fantastic. I remember Joe Rubin, again, on the phone one day, he said to me, our mothers and our grandmothers couldn't write us these kind of reviews. They're too good.
Wow. Yeah.
And so they decided to bring out the movie a second time. I can't remember how much longer, maybe 2 months later. I don't remember, but they brought it out a second time and they launched it with a whole different campaign. I think the first campaign is Terry standing and looking in the mirror, and the second campaign is me with the dog, and then the shadow figure of the man, the stepfather with the knife.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting. I mean, how many movies can you think of within a couple of months was released a second time?
Yeah,
to give it a chance.
I can't think of any. That's pretty bizarre.
I can't think of one other film either that's happened to.
Wow.
You know.
Yeah,
but it was solely based on those fantastic reviews.
It's got pretty much everything you want in a good thriller.
I was really happy. Somebody posted on my Facebook page a couple of months ago, and I guess this article was actually a year or two ago. I'm not even quite sure when it was, but it wasn't exactly current, but it was an article on Stephen King and him talking about his all-time favorite 20 scary films, and The Stepfather was one of them.
Oh, wow. Stephen
I
King.
was like, that's great.
That's quite a compliment from him, yeah. So that movie spawned a couple sequels, as Hollywood does when a movie's a success. It spawned some sequels. Was there any discussion to bring you back in any of those?
They had originally talked to me about Stepfather Part 2, spoken to my agent. My agent mentioned it to me, and then I don't remember ever hearing anything ever again about it. And I think like they used some of the original one in Part 2 at the beginning or something, but outside of that, no. I don't know why. I don't know if they, I'm sure it was all driven by the script, the direction of the script. And, but, you never know.
Right,
but,
right.
Yeah. Yes, there was a conversation. Why that conversation never developed, I just either don't know or can't remember, but I would remember. So I'm going to go with I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, they did a couple sequels, and then they did a remake in 2009, but nothing really... Huh?
I said, oh! Yeah,
I was going to say, nothing compares to the that original 1987 movie. That was the one to watch. So, jumping back a little bit, you started working in showbiz at a pretty young age. Now, do you feel that that ultimately led to you wanting a change in your life as you got older?
I started working in high school, and I had done my very first theatrical job was an ABC pilot, and I was in high school, and I starred in it with two other unknowns. It was their first job, too, as well, Kristen Glover and Nicolas Cage. The show was called The Best of Times. And so that started in high school. Plus I was, doing a lot of singing, dancing commercials on television, big commercials at that time, huge, for quite a few years in all the first years of my theatrical career. Wow. And I just made the decision to go with the acting because it was happening readily and fast.
Right.
Then I left the business. I started, slowing down, bypassing on things when I was in my late 20s, and I met my ex-husband, and he really was very kind of old-fashioned, didn't want me to work. We talked about getting married and having children, wanted his wife, and I kind of felt the same way about being a full-time mom and being there. So the day I found out I was pregnant with my oldest son, I left the business. I called my agents and said, I'm done. Then when I had my son, I think about 3 months later, I went back to work. I went to 3 auditions, and all 3 of them got to be between me and somebody else. I didn't get any of them, but it was 3 different jobs right away, like in a 1 or 2 week period. And I just remember sitting there at that last one, and, you know, I was nursing the son, and my body was calling me to be at home with my baby, not be out trying to get jobs. And so I called again a second time, and I said, okay, this time it's for real. I'm done. I'm leaving the business.
Wow.
And I left at that point. And at that point, a few months later, I was like, what do I do now with my life? Yeah. I've been working for so long. I was like, what now? It felt very, very strange. All of a sudden I was, you know, Mrs. Marinelli and, you know, not Joe Schoelen.
Right.
And it was a full-time mom, you know, to my boy.
You know, so many people get tied up in Hollywood and that's all they think about. And, you know, let nannies raise their kids and, you know, then occasionally make an appearance and say, look, I'm a hands-on mother, but, you know, they're doing all these jobs. So, you know, they really probably aren't. But you really took that step and decided to be, you know, there for your kid.
Thank you for that. But I need to say this, especially to any women, young women listening. And that is, again, I do not regret. However, I'm not going to be blind to what I've learned. And what I've learned is I had a real problem giving away my power, and I did that to my ex-husband as well. You know, I just left my career, left everything I'd worked so hard for. Well, as a woman, I want to say to every young woman, you are your best insurance policy in life, right? People get medical insurance, they get this insurance, that insurance. Owning our life is our best insurance because it assures for great things happening. I abandoned my career.
Yeah.
I don't, in retrospect, I think it was fine to leave the business, but not abandon it. Those are 2 very, very different things.
So you feel you went too far one way, you think?
Yes. I turned my back. I went to the extreme, to the total extreme.
Yeah.
Didn't even care. It was like when you don't care, it's like not caring about your own life. And that's not, we want to be a mother, we want to be in the fullness of who we are. Doesn't mean we can't temporarily stop working or, you know, redefine our lives a certain way, but not abandon them. There's such a profound difference.
Did your agent or publicist at the time try to like convince you not to do that?
They didn't really have the chance. I mean, I was very, very clear. I think they were very happy when I, you know, came back to work for that week or 2 and met with a few directors on a couple projects. I think they were very happy, but, you know, it really wasn't a discussion, to be honest with you. It was, you know, I was done. My ex-husband was a film composer. We didn't have some financial issues in terms of, you know, my needing to work. You know, things were going well for us.
Right.
And so at that time, they really were. And so it just seemed like a good choice. But in retrospect, I don't think it was the wisest choice. Right. And I would caution somebody, a woman, to abandon her own life. Because you want to be there for your kids. I mean, my kids didn't even know anything about my background. Nothing.
Yeah. Right.
Because I just was their mom at home.
Yeah.
You know?
So before we jump any further ahead, I did not want to miss an opportunity to talk about one of my favorite movies that you did, When a Stranger Calls Back, the sequel to the 1979 classic.
I like that movie, too. I'm so glad you mentioned that because so many people don't even know it exists, and that is right up there with the Stepfather for me.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have seen the original When a Stranger Calls. It's the Carol Kane movie. She's on somebody keeps harassing her. The first like 20 minutes of that movie are probably the most memorable part of that movie, and then maybe the last 10 minutes. But it's a pretty good movie. But then they did a sequel in the early 90s starring Jill here, and I would say that it is equally as suspenseful as the original movie. And again, in that first 20 minutes, and they did a different take on it. Rather than somebody calling on the phone, it's somebody at the front door who is communicating with you through the front door, which really makes the suspense, I think, even a little more so than a telephone.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'll never forget. One of the main reasons I wanted to do the sequel, and because I had never really been involved with sequels, I was always like, that wasn't my thing. But with that movie, I was such a fan of When a Stranger Calls. I mean, I didn't watch horror movies or anything, but again, that one was different. That wasn't like splash 'em up, blah, blah, typical horror. It was very like scary in that first movie. When she when they're tracing the call, and then she picks up the phone, it's like, leave me alone. And he says, Jill, get out of the house. The call is coming from it. Oh, I have the chill. I can't even say it. I have the chills head to toe.
Yeah.
When he tells her that the call is coming from inside the house. I mean, for me, I was a latchkey kid. That's why I really wanted to be a full-time mom, because I had parents that worked, and they worked 6 days a week, and they were not home. Mm-hmm. And I remember the fear of always being alone. And it was not fun to be a little girl and to be alone in the, even though I had 3 brothers, they often were doing what they were doing, or, the 3 of them hung out, and then there was me. Alone, the only girl. And so that movie really struck a chord with me when I was, I don't know, I must have been like 12 or something. And it was just very, very scary. So I wanted to do the movie because I was a fan of the first one. And they did have a different take on it. And it was great that it was the same cast, same director. I mean, all that was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. They were able to recapture that feel and the suspense of that first movie. I mean, that first 20 minutes where you were in the house and the guy, his car broke down. He wanted to use your phone and you were talking to him through the door. I mean, it was really suspenseful stuff. The pace of the script really worked very well for the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it too.
You had much shorter hair in that first segment of the film than we're used to seeing.
I did. I had a friend of mine. Do you remember the singer Martika? Did a song called in the 80s called Toy Soldiers that was really popular. I think that Eminem later used some of that in one of his songs.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, this girl, I think she was on Columbia, CBS. I forget what record label she was on, but I was doing a show in Los Angeles, the one where I played Spirit. I told you about my mentors, Gene and Tony, and they wrote this play. It was a musical. I did it for 5 years. I played a teenage suicide. Well, when I left the show after 5 years, the girl that took over my role was this young singer, Martika. And then like 6 weeks later, she left the show, so she got her big record deal. But anyway, the girl that worked with her at I think it was Columbia. I don't remember her label. Anyway, I became friends with this girl at that record label, and she talked me into cutting my hair short. So I cut my hair off, and actually, when I did that movie, it had quite grown in, so it was long, short hair. It was really, my hair was like short before that. And then they added a little hairpiece with a little mullet look, later on for part 2, 5 years later.
Right. Yeah. Were you in favor of
Which
that?
was like, a lot of people, it's funny because over the years people would say, oh, Jill with that hair, and they don't like it. But for me as an actress, I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it. It created something. It brought another element out to look different. Mm-hmm. To look in the mirror, it makes you feel like that person feels, not the way Jill feels. I loved it for the character. I thought it was perfect.
So I was wondering if you were ever approached to do any like commentary tracks for maybe that movie or The Stepfather, like on a DVD, something like that.
Well, I do love that kind of thing, but they're never going to ask me to do that. They're always going to ask me.
I like hearing from the stars. I mean, like earlier when you were telling me that scene in The Stepfather in the garage, I had no idea about that scene. If you could watch the movie and do a commentary to it, I mean, I think I'd want to hear from the stars personally.
I don't know. I mean, sure, that sounds like fun. I think on the Blu-ray, Joe Rutten probably does a commentary like that. I would imagine. I haven't listened to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I would imagine at least he did. No, I love that kind of thing. Nobody's ever asked me to do anything like that. Definitely not for a Blu-ray. They're going to ask probably the director. But that sounds fun. I'd love to do that kind of thing. And definitely in interviews on Blu-ray, I feel like they're hiring me or whatever, asking me to do the interview, not as the full person, Jill, but as that actress from that time, if that makes sense. Again, stuff that if I could go back and redo, I would approach some of those interviews differently. Definitely the Stepfather one. Because I remember when I saw the Blu-ray and saw what they kept of me in there, I was like, are you kidding me? But maybe that's how I came across. Maybe that was me. They kept all this lighthearted. I love laughing. Look how many times I've laughed in this interview. Yeah. But I would not call it my sum total. Right.
This is Jill Schoelen you're listening to, star of The Stepfather, When a Stranger Calls Back. She did a bunch of movies, and we're going to see what she's got coming up these days. But I have another question about just a general actor question. Filming some like love scenes, for example. I've heard a lot of people talk about, they don't feel anything because, you're on set. There's a whole crew around you. How was your experience, filming some love scenes?
Well, I didn't do too many. I did one in a movie. You probably never saw this movie called Rich Girl. Okay. Nobody saw this movie. But I had a love scene in it. And I did one kind of in a horror movie. And this was like probably the only horror movie I ever did. It was a sequel to The Curse, even though one had nothing to do with the other. It was called The Curse 2. Yeah. And it was like with snakes and whatever. And I think there was a love scene in that movie, and it's work. It's a day on the set. It can be uncomfortable, I think, a little bit. I didn't do a lot of that kind of thing, but I remember it a little bit, and it's just I think maybe are a little bit more nervous than other scenes.
Yeah.
And, but everything that I was involved with still was extraordinarily tasteful.
Yeah.
Nothing extreme. And I don't think I would fare well with extreme.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I mean, I know, sometimes when you do love scenes, you develop some relationship with the or with the actor you're doing it with. Now, I know you and Brad Pitt had a little time there together. During the movie Cutting Class, which you said you didn't really care for that movie, but with your relationship with Brad Pitt, was it just like a quick Hollywood thing, or?
Well, I didn't really talk about that. I just if it's all right, because he's become so famous. He's at a different level than most actors are with their fame. So it's really something I just stay away from. The way I look at it, it's just, he and I had a relationship, and it's like any other relationship. It's, between us.
Right. I got you.
So I don't mean to be rude.
No, not at all. Not at all. I remember hearing like things from like Nicole Eggert dating Corey Haim. Just when you're young and you work with somebody and you get, it's just, I guess it's natural on set to kind of develop feelings for a person while you're working with them.
Well, I will tell you this part. I will say this part, that a friend of mine was a costume designer. She's no longer here with us. Her name is Kelly. She passed 17 years ago from cancer. She was my best friend who I grew up with, and coincidentally, She was on that movie, but I was going through another breakup with Mr. Keanu Reeves prior to being with Brad, and I was heartbroken. And my friend Kelly was like, "You need, you need to be the and then Keanu was so nice, so I'm not singing with him, but I was heartbroken, so she's like, you need to be with the nicest guy, and I've met the nicest guy. I've been working on this movie. We're getting ready to shoot it, and there's this young actor, and he's from Missouri, and he's so great, and oh my God, Julie, you would just love him. He would love you, and he's a nice guy. He's the kind of person you need to be with." And I'm like, I'm not dating an actor.
Yeah.
And then, it was like a week or two later or something, and I got this call, and I didn't want to do the movie. I really didn't, but my agents really gave me a list of reasons why I should do the movie. And I spontaneously, in my car, I said yes. I'll never forget it. And so they said, but you have to go right away to wardrobe. And I drove to where they told me to drive to. And when I was waiting for the costume designer, I was just sitting there by myself. And all of a sudden, like 10 minutes later, I hear Jill. And I'm like, Kelly? And she said, are you the actress I'm meeting? I'm like, are you the costume designer I'm meeting?
Wow.
And she's like, Jill, this is that movie of that guy I've been wanting you to meet.
That's a great story.
Isn't that small? Yeah, that's a small world.
So what do you got going on these days?
So now I'm in the reinvent time. That's why I love talking to you. I mean, I'm so grateful for the fans that have, continued to think of me and to meet people who don't know me and who are discovering films that I've done of the past. I'm just so grateful for them. They really are the best audience. And so Suzanne and I, about a year ago, I was batting around this idea in my head. Suzanne Snyder, just reminding everyone, from Weird Science and Killer Clowns from Outer Space and Seinfeld and a bunch of other great things. She and I have been friends since we were like 20, 21, very, very close friends. Yeah. And I was batting around this Scream Queen chef idea in my head because I wanted to do something that was directly related to the fans because I've been out of the business so long. So anyway, I was going to call it Scream Queen Chef, but because of Paramount owning Scream Queens, I couldn't use the name, so I came up with the new name, Sugar and Scream. And Suzanne has come on as my partner, and we've already shot a couple of episodes of this new show. We designed the show, and I want to make this very, very clear, not for us. We designed it to give something back to the fans because Suzanne and I, and with so many other fellow actors from that time who go out on the conventions, there's such a love and a gratitude for the fans that have kept it all alive and keep this whole motor going for the love of horror and sci-fi and thrillers. So we thought, let's do a show for the fans. So our show is called Sugar and Scream. And it is, we call it Where Health Meets Horror. And we're doing real food, but it's healthy. But all of our recipes, or let me put it this way, we have a guest chef on every episode, and they're from an iconic horror movie or thriller or sci-fi or TV show. So we've shot 4 so far. So, for instance, Betsy Russell is on from the Saw series. And we're doing some garlic bread. And
and you guys just chat during this?
Yeah, we do. We make a recipe and we have a chat. And our screen queen, and sometimes we'll have guys on too. But for the girls so far, the women that have been on the show, we end the episode with the scream, like Alexandra Paul, Alexandra Paul from the movie Christine and Baywatch and so many great things that she's done. she reenacts her death scene, and it is so fantastic. So, yeah. And so we'll make, like, Texas Coleslaw Massacre or Michael Meyer Lemon Drop or Battlestar Galactic Cosmo. And it's really to give back to the fans, you know, like say, hey, you guys, look how great, and look who's on this week, and we're making this for you. And, you know, a lot of fan engagement. That's where we're taking the show. I've written my book. I'm not quite done with it, but I'm getting there. I'm getting very close to the editing stages. So I'm very excited about that.
That's very exciting, yeah. So as far as that show you're talking about, Sugar and Scream, where could people see that?
Well, I tell you what, we designed it for the internet. We have our own YouTube channel.
Okay.
But as we've shot 4 episodes and doing our homework with shopping it, we've had an absolutely fantastic response.
Awesome.
So now we're rethinking if we should do it and own the show totally the way our design was for the internet, or are we going to try and, you know, fry a bigger fish? We're gonna take it out for a spin because of the fantastic response that we're getting in at this stage.
Now, so to kind of as we wind down here, you mentioned you're writing the book. About it's an autobiography about all your life in show business and outside of show business.
Kind of. I'll try and make it as short as I possibly can. You know me, I like to talk. Sorry about that. So as I mentioned to you about not regretting, but at the same time really learning life lessons. I had a very interesting thing happen to me. After I divorced, I was with a man for 5.5 years, and I lost that man. He died. And during that time, it was very stressful for me, and I got an autoimmune disease. And I went through something that was really shocking after being an actress. Not horrible. God, there's so many horrible things in the world, so this is not horrible. It was just bad for me in my private small little chill world. And that was that I got vitiligo. But I learned something during that time when I depigmatized, and I looked really bad some days. I mean, I felt, I'm going to start crying if I say this, I felt so ugly. I felt so ugly. And I didn't want to leave the house. I didn't want to go out. I wanted to not literally die, but to hide and not live in terms of a full life. I wanted to be alive, of course. I wasn't like that, not wanting to live.
Yeah.
But I mean, I didn't want to live in terms of walking out onto the planet every day and having, you know, a full life, because I felt so full of shame for how I looked. I was, you know, I had my dark olive skin for a white person. I was quite olive. And then I was losing my coloration and depigmatizing. I went through the experience of, like, people, like, literally at the grocery store, I remember being in line and a kid was standing next to me, and the mom, like, pulled him away, get away from that lady, honey. You know, don't touch her, you know, like, and I just went, I got this insight. And it had happened to me also as a child. It's something I never talk about. But I had no hair. I went bald as a child. And so I've had this now twice in my life, this kind of thing happen. I've had this roller coaster of, like, these real lows in that way, and these extreme highs with starring in movies and traveling all over the world and being treated like a princess and having all kinds of people wanting to date you and, you know, that kind of life.
Yeah.
And in these extremes, and I thought, I need to write about this. I need to write about the journey of worth.
Yeah.
So that's what my book is. It's The Skin I Live In, A Journey of Self-Worth. And so it's not really an autobiography other than to tell the story and the journey of worth.
Wow. Well, I think that's pretty brave of you to write about things that aren't necessarily the easiest subjects to discuss or talk about. But I think it will help a lot of people who struggle with all kinds of things. I mean, whether you're famous or not, you're gonna always run into problems, and for you to write about these things, it sounds like pretty candidly in your book, is definitely commendable.
I appreciate you saying that. I do. I mean, well, I'm still working on it. Every time I think, okay, I'm doing that last amount, I'm just gonna buckle down for the next 10 days.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't happen. I feel like in some ways I'm scared to finish it and get it out there. I don't know what my problem is. Someone tell me.
I think a lot of people that write books about all kinds of things run into that issue. It's just part of the process, I think.
Maybe. I guess I'm learning in all kinds of ways.
Yeah. Well,
And by the way,
yeah.
Can I just piggyback on the Sugar and Scream thing?
Go ahead.
We have a very simple, holding page website that's already up, sugarandscream.com, and you can see some of the pictures from our first couple episodes. Taste and a feel for what we're doing just by seeing the pictures.
Yeah, cool. I'll put a link to that so people get to hit that and check it out.
Awesome.
Absolutely. All right, so this has really been great talking with you, Jill. I definitely appreciate you coming on the show, and it's really been a lot of fun.
Oh, it has been. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, take care, okay?
Okay, you too.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.